This week will be a continuation from last week on the theme of will you take God at his word. At least the first half will be. And then the second half, Cole is going to show us some science and sort of rationale and evidence from science about how the biblical worldview can make sense of DNA and such. So that'll be the second half. So we'll jump in though and do a quick recap. So there are two competing presuppositions. What's another word for presuppositions? Or can anybody tell me a definition of presuppositions? Presuppose is part of it. Luke, do you have an idea?
I wasn't here last week.
Okay, that's true. Or Caleb?
Is it like assuming?
Yeah, exactly. There are things you assume. Remember we looked at a syllogism, how you had two premises and then a conclusion. The premises you assume to be true, and then you draw conclusions from it. So presuppositions is just another word, and that's a word. Once we get into once Jason starts teaching apologetics, you'll hear a lot more. And so the two competing presuppositions, or things that get assumed, is sort of our worldview with creationists, which is the world was created in 6 days, 6 normal days. Can you tell me what the competing presupposition about the universe is?
Billions of years.
Okay, billions of years. And how do even for the people that take evolution, how do they think the universe came to be? Or what is their view of the universe? Okay, Big Bang, so just kind of self-generated. And then there's one other alternative that's been very popular throughout history. Brandon, you... Okay. Yeah, it's always been around. So that's been another common one throughout history, and even today, where people are just like, the universe is just, it is what it is. They're called naturalists, and they think this, the universe has maybe always been around, or it's self-generated. And we looked a little bit, especially with Cole's presentation, you'll see a little bit how that doesn't really make sense of what we observe in the world. And it also doesn't make a lot of logical sense. And then we also looked at pluralistic thinking. So what most people have done throughout history is they don't have a very consistent worldview. They tend to take a little bit of here and a little bit of there. And Christians can be tempted to do the same thing, where they try to mix their own ideas or ideas of the world with the Christian worldview. And so we want to guard against that. And you see some of that even happening with Genesis. And so that's why as we're going through Genesis, we're not just we're going through and seeing what Genesis 1 and 2 teach, but also how we can train ourselves to look at the Bible, read the Bible better. And then exegesis, where we're trying to draw the meaning out of the text. Does anybody remember what the opposite of exegesis is? Okay, what is eisegesis?
It's where you kind of incorporate your own meaning inside the text.
Right, exactly. You sort of have your own ideas that you read into the Bible, and it's what do you think's harder, exegesis or eisegesis? Which one is harder to do, or takes a little bit more work? Yeah, why? Yeah, you can always find a verse to prove your ideas. It's easy to just read it and assume what it means, but exegesis is a little bit harder, but it's possible. You can do it. The Bible is written for normal people to be able to read and understand, and it's clear. And so we want to make sure that we're taking God at his word, and reading the Bible like a book in context. So we'll do that real quick. We'll go through a few passages of Genesis, and going through the rest of the days from where we left off last week. So I'll read this. Then God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light on earth." And it was so. So he's saying that he's creating two, well, actually, I'll finish reading verse 16. So God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, and also the stars. So what is the greater light? What is the lesser light?
The sun is the greater light and the moon is the stars.
Okay, yes. And so when he created the sun, was there finally light in the world?
No, he created light on day one.
Yeah, exactly. So he created light on day one, but here is where he creates the sun and the star, where light comes from, henceforth. And then notice he mentions the stars and also the stars. If anybody saw, we did a video last week on astronomy and seeing the beauty of the universe. I mean, how many stars are there? Yeah, we don't even know, right? There's so many out there. It's interesting how this is an afterthought almost. So he's saying he created the sun and the moon and also the stars, but that stars included so many beautiful things in the universe. And what's one of the reasons, what's interesting about this is back in the pagan religions and other religions nearby, they often saw the stars as being extremely important, maybe representing gods out there, and the Bible doesn't give the credence or the weight to the stars that some of the pagan religions do as being gods themselves. And so it's almost an afterthought, but the more and more we learn and see about the heavens, the more beautiful we see it is. Verse 17, and God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth. So do you remember from last week? What is the expanse?
The expanse is the area between the clouds and the earth.
Okay, yeah. So that's the first part. The first part of the expanse is between sort of the earth and the clouds. And then what else? How else would you, Isaac? Yeah, so it's everything when you look up, right? So that includes the expanse and the clouds, the heavens. The Jewish term for sky was just heavens often. And so he placed the stars and the moon and the sun in that expanse, in the sky. And notice it also says that there'll be for signs and for seasons, for days and years. Can anybody think of an example of how people have used stars or the moon for signs and seasons, for measuring time?
Well, certain stars that they would have used in what is it when you're sailing?
Okay, yeah, like the North Star.
Yeah.
Yep.
And also what position the sun is in the sky.
Right. Yeah. So people have been able to figure things out based on the heavens, and certain stars and certain constellations are only there during certain seasons. And actually, we talked a little bit about how the Bible doesn't teach a flat Earth. One of the ways back in the day that people figured out the Earth was round was by looking at the constellations and the stars at different times, and they could kind of figure out the only way for it to make sense was if the Earth was round. And then the moon, you can kind of measure time, right, based on the full moon and no moon. So verse 17, and God placed them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on earth and to rule the day and the night and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there's evening and there's morning, a fourth day. So we see a lot of the same patterns last week where God spoke these into existence, and it was good what he created. And then you had the morning, or the evening and the morning during each time. So we'll look at verse Genesis 1:20 through 23. Then God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the face of the expanse of the heavens. And God created the great sea monsters and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarmed after their kind, and every winged bird after its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply and fill the waters in the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth. And there's evening and there's morning, a fifth day. So notice here, it mentions, this is the first time it mentions living creatures, as it talks about creating the birds and the fish. And so, question for you, are plants living? Yes. Okay. I would agree, right? There's a sense in which plants are living. But the Bible doesn't often call plants, like, would you call a plant a living creature? No, why not?
Because they're not actively, and they don't possess something that would make you think that they're living, but some of them do actually.
Right, right. So we kind of know there's a difference, right? And the Bible understands that difference between a plant, which is living in one sense, but also just creatures, living creatures that um, swarm the earth. And so where this matters a little bit is we talk about how there's no death in the Garden of Eden or in the future, right? But there will be still death of plants, and you will still be eating plants. So we'll go to Genesis 1, 24, 25. Then God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things, beasts of the earth after their kind. And it was so. God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, and the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing on the ground after its kind. And God saw that it was good. So now, we talked a little bit about this last week, but is kind the same as species? No. What's the difference? Aya? Hmm? Right, yes. Yeah. So a kind could have multiple species. And so Cole will go over this a little bit, but this is where sometimes people get confused because you can have kinds that kind of change into different species, but that isn't the same thing as evolution and everything coming back to one original source. So then we'll look at the creation of man. We'll dig into this a little bit more in next week's lesson, where we talk about what it means to be made in the image of God, but we'll hit on it briefly here. Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, so that they will have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. And God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. So one thing that's important is he didn't create them as babies, right? He created them mature. And so why do you think that might matter when you're talking to an evolutionist?
Well, babies can't really help themselves. They need someone to help them first.
Right.
And so it would make more sense because God gave Adam the job of naming every bird and animal, plant, and everything. And so he wouldn't be able to do that very well as a baby.
Right. Yeah. So it makes sense that he made him mature. Is there anything else you think that God made mature? So if you were at the video or watched the video on astronomy last week, he also made the heavens mature, right, and galaxies mature in a sense. And so it was interesting because Jason Lyle, he talked about how when they got this new powerful telescope to see even farther out into the universe, that all of the evolutionists were like, well, we think we may not even see things because the Earth, there hasn't been enough time for the light to get to us. And they were also like, and we think galaxies form over time. And so if we do see galaxies, they're going to be smaller and they're going to look more immature. And then Jason Lyle mentioned how he made predictions as a creationist that actually when we get that powerful telescope to see even farther out, I think it's going to be a mature world, a mature universe. We're going to see galaxies like we do here that are fully formed. And he had different presuppositions about the world. And so he made predictions and evolutionists made predictions. And who was right was the creationist. He was right that when they got that telescope, they looked far out, that the galaxies were still fully formed, and they looked very similar to the galaxies close to us. And that's because God, he made the universe mature. He made the sun mature. So sometimes evolutionists, they'll go and they'll say, well, look, the sun, we think it takes 1 million years to get to this point. And it's like, well, maybe that's true. I mean, you don't really know that because you haven't actually observed that happening. But at the same time, God created the sun and everything else in the universe sort of mature and complete. So it's helpful to remember that. Another thing that you see just with the creation of man, and you especially see this in Genesis 2, is that God was personally involved with it. So sometimes people or common view of God is that he's a deist or deism. Can anybody tell me what deism is?
The belief in any kind of higher
power. Okay. So they believe in a higher power, but they have a certain belief about them. Okay. Yep. So one analogy they might use is like a clock. I don't know if you've ever done this, but like some clocks you could sort of wind up to get them going, and then you set them, and the clock just ticks over. So they're like, that's what God did. He kind of just like wound it up and let it loose, and then he didn't really care. He wasn't really personally involved. He just let it happen after he got it going. But that's not the God we have. That's not the God in the Bible. He actually personally cares about his creation. He personally cares about each of you as well. He knows everything you do. He's planned it from the beginning. He's personally seen you created and grow and mature and all that. He's a God that cares about his creation. And also at the same time, we're his dependent creatures made for his purpose. We don't get to just decide what we're here for. God's actually told us what we're here for, and what our purpose is, what our significance is, what the meaning of life is. And the more we align with that, that's what he designed us to be. And so we'll see more about that in next week's lesson. But he created man mature. He's personally involved, and we're his dependent creatures. So now one thing we want to deal with, we talked a little bit last week about the gap theory, how some people try to find a way to fit billions of years into Genesis. We're going to talk today about another theory people have for how they try to fit evolution into Genesis. So, and that's called the day-age theory. And what this says is that when the Bible or when Genesis 1 talks about a day, it's not talking about like a normal day like we would say, like a 24-hour day for us. What they're instead talking about is like an era or an age. What do you think about that? Can day mean an era or age? Do you think so? It can mean that. Yep, you're right. And of course, if you can make this work, then you've now reconciled Genesis 1 with evolution. Our view, though, is that the word day in Genesis 1 is just a normal day with an evening and a morning. Now, day can have different meanings depending on the context. So here's an example. In my father's day, on the first day of school, they had to walk home while it was still day. So you kind of see a few different ways day is used there. So when I say in my father's day, what does that mean? Right. So that's kind of like in a specific era, right? In my father's era. What about the first day of school? What kind of day is that?
The day when you start school.
Yeah. It's like a specific day, right? A specific normal 24-hour day. And then when you said he walked home while it was still day, what kind of day is that? Yeah, daylight, right? And even actually in Genesis 1, it uses day that way as well. So it could mean either a specific day, an era, an age, or just normal daylight. And this is just how words work in general. So if I was to say I hit the ball with a bat, does anybody play baseball here? Baseball, softball? Yeah. Yeah. So I could mean this. This is probably what you thought about. Or I could mean this. So, because a bat could mean either one, right? It could be a baseball bat or the animal bat. So, but how do you know which one I meant when I said I hit the ball with a bat? Ivan? Okay, it makes the most sense.
There's evidence across the world that no one will hit a bat, an actual bat with balls.
Okay, maybe. Caleb? Context, is that what you're going to say, Evelyn? Yeah. So context, I think, is a good answer, right? So when we talk about hitting a ball, in that context, I'm going to mean a bat, meaning a baseball bat, right? So based on the context, you can kind of figure out what words mean. And this is something when you're reading the Bible to keep in mind. Like you might read a word and not know what it means, or it might mean multiple things, and it's great to sort of do some research and figure out what the word could mean. But it doesn't mean both, right? It can't have multiple definitions. I either mean a baseball bat or I mean the animal bat. It's one or the other. You can't try to read both ideas into it. And so when you're reading the Bible, a word could have multiple meanings, and you, based on reading the context, you can kind of figure out what meaning they're using. And so going back here, with day having different meanings, there's a couple questions we have to look at. We'll talk a little bit about, are the days in Genesis actual days or ages? So again, a big part of that is seeing the context, the words around, the verses around. And then we'll also talk about what genre is Genesis. So sometimes people will try to say it's a kind of genre that you shouldn't take literally. You should interpret it not as straightforward as it appears. And so we'll answer those two questions today. So day in Genesis 1 is a normal day with an evening and morning, not an age. So that's our view. And essentially how you could do this is like when you use day, you typically mean a normal day, right? Like same in the Old Testament and the New Testament, a day meant a normal day. And unless you have a strong reason to believe otherwise, that's just the way you should take it, because that's how it's usually used. Also, it always means a normal day when it uses a cardinal number. First day, second day. So what that just means is it's saying which day it is, right? Day 1, day 2, there's evening and morning, the fourth day, right? Always in the Bible, and just in normal speech, when you add that number to it, it means a normal day. And then the text even literally defines a day for you. It says an evening and a morning. So it really couldn't be any clearer. And there's this idea of non-falsifiable. I don't know if kind of an important term. Some people view it's like you could never pin them down, no matter what evidence or what logic you bring to them. They'll just always sort of work around it. So a common example of this is someone who went to the doctor and he was convinced he was dead. So he went to the doctor and says, "I'm a dead man." It's like, "Well, you don't look dead. You're walking and breathing." "Yeah, I still think I'm a dead man." And then he was like, "Well, do dead men bleed?" And asked the doctor, and the guy was like, "No, I guess dead men don't bleed." So he quickly took a little needle, pricked him, and then showed him bleeding. And the guy looked at himself bleeding and said, "Well, I guess dead men do bleed." So it's just like some people's views are that way. A lot of conspiracies are that way, where you could always just come up with some other explanation. But when you look at it and the evidence is just so clearly leading to one view, that's the view that you should take. The other thing is talking about genres. And so can anybody tell me what a genre is? Jonathan?
Like a genre movie, a comedy or action.
Okay, yeah, that's a great example. So there's different types of literature. So does anybody know what kind of genres are in the Bible? The different types of literature.
Past and nonfiction.
I'm sorry?
Past.
So like history?
Yeah, history.
Okay, yeah, history, that's one. So poetry is a big one. What are some books with poetry?
Psalms.
Yeah, Psalms, Proverbs. You probably, okay. Any other kind of like what about the Romans? Is that history or is that poetry? Caleb?
It was like letters.
Yeah, letter. It's neither, right? It's letters. That's a different kind of thing. What are some books that are history books? Or historical narrative is another way to say it. Wyatt, can you think of a book in the Bible? Exodus, yep, that's history. Leviticus, okay.
First and Second Kings, First, Second Chronicles, Genesis.
Yep. What about that's good. What about the New Testament? What are some history books?
Gospel.
The Gospels, right? The Gospels and Acts primarily. So there's a variety of different genres in the Bible: epistles, letters, wisdom and poetry, history, historical narrative, law. There's the prophets. That's kind of a genre in its own. And so what some people will say is the Bible or Genesis 1 is poetry. And so with poetry, you have a lot of metaphors, kind of non-literal language, and they'll be like, "Oh, well, don't take it literally. Don't take it for what it says, because it's just poetry." Does that seem right to you? What genre do you think Genesis 1 is?
History.
It's history, right? And people have done analysis of the different things that you see in historical narrative versus poetry, and it's overwhelmingly historical narrative. So one thing is in poetry, you have Hebrew parallelism. Does anybody know what that is? What Hebrew parallelism? It's kind of the foundational thing of Hebrew poetry. So in English poetry, a big part is kind of the rhythm and the rhyming. In Hebrew, the main thing of poetry is parallelism.
So it's like two ideas that are pretty similar to each other.
Yep, exactly. And so sometimes those ideas they're parallel. Sometimes they're the opposite of each other. So here's an example of that.
Analogies and metaphors.
So that's a big part of it too. Yeah, you see a lot of illustrations, metaphors. So there's the mouth of the righteous is a fountain of life, and then the mouth of the wicked covers up violence. So you kind of see how those two lines are parallel to each other, but they're contrasting. They're saying opposite things, or things that are contrastive. And then you have synonymous, which is what you were saying, where here's an example of that. Make me know your ways, O Yahweh. Teach me your paths. Is he saying something different in each line? Is make me know your ways different than teach me your paths? What do you think, Simon?
I mean, there are different words for it, but they're like the same meaning.
Exactly. That's exactly what's going on. So he's saying it a little bit different way, but he's talking about the same thing, right? Also, just some of the grammar. Remember, we talked about grammar being important. It's a type of grammar that shows sequence, that shows like here's what happened and then here's what happened. You don't see that in poetry. You do see it in Genesis 1, and just a lot of other structural word usage, how they use the article. It's just historical narrative. And so when you come to Genesis, and if somebody says, "Oh, that's just poetry," like no, like it is actually teaching history. It's worded the same as other historical books in the Bible. So again, just emphasizing Genesis 1 could not be clearer. Now it is interesting. There's a lot of good people that don't take Genesis 1 literally or with this view. So like reading a lot of commentaries, there's a lot of commentators that I like, and they have a lot of good things to say, especially in other parts of the Bible, but they don't take Genesis 1 literally. So why do you think that is? Why might somebody, a good person, why would they not take it literally? What do you think they're trying to accomplish by not taking this view? What do you think, Zach? So they all believe in God. They all believe in like the inerrancy of Scripture.
You want to be contrary? Just don't want to.
I actually think it's the opposite of that.
They might want to agree with the world a bit, but
Yeah, essentially. So essentially, they're like, well, the scientific evidence is so strong for evolution. We gotta try to like, take that into account. So that's really the only reason you wouldn't take Genesis 1 for what it says is if you're trying to fit evolution in there. And so we'll talk a little bit about how you really don't need to do that. The evidence isn't so strongly for evolution, and science shouldn't lead you to that conclusion. But when you look at the text, it is very clearly teaching creationism, and that's something which, again, you should take that mindset to everything. So you see it here very clearly. When you go to other parts of the Bible that maybe you don't like or maybe doesn't make fully sense to you, doesn't match with your experience or your reasoning, like you can take the Bible for what it says. And God saw that all he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. So after the creation of man, God's work was complete. It was finished, and that's why he could say it was very good. So why would he say very good instead of just good? What was the difference? It pleased him. Okay. What else? Why wasn't it when he first created light? For example, he created light. He didn't say it was very good. He just said it was good. Yeah, it wasn't complete, right? Everything else needed to be sort of formed and put together. And ultimately, man was kind of the crowning achievement of creation. And it wasn't very good until man was created. Now, one thing that's important with this is it's critical to realize that um, um, like the earth is actually like in material is good in and of itself, or can be good in and of itself. Some people, they're called Gnostics, they were like, oh, actually the material world is evil, only spiritual things are good. And that's just not the way the Bible talks about the material world. So someday in the future in heaven, where is heaven? What is heaven like? Somebody tell me. Where? Let me ask you another way. Where is heaven? So someday, the eternal state, where is heaven? What do you think, Jace? Okay.
Some people say it's like far in the sky, but
Okay, in the clouds,
it's like more of a
spiritual
spiritual realm.
realm.
It's with God.
So, okay, yeah. So heaven. The definition of heaven is with God. That's good. So the way the Bible talks about heaven, though, in the future internally, is heaven is going to be on earth. So someday God's going to give Christians resurrected bodies, and He's going to sort of restore earth, like destroy it, create a new earth, and that's where heaven will be. So we will be like physical bodies on heaven. There'll be buildings. It's not it's not in the clouds. It's not a spiritual state. God created the world, and the world material is good. And someday his creation it's going to be restoration of paradise, of the Garden of Eden, and heaven will be on earth. It's not going to be in the clouds, and you'll be doing things.
Heaven will be on earth in the future. Where is it now?
So that's a good question. So right now, when you die, right, death is a separation of your soul from your body, from your physical body, and so your soul, if you're a Christian, goes to be with God, and so there is a sort of a spiritual realm. But someday, what our future hope, and this is like Jesus, right? He resurrected. He still has a physical body right now. Someday, our hope is that we'll have physical bodies as well, that'll be reunited with our souls, and we'll be able to live on earth with God. So God's dwelling place forever will be this earth. So here's an example of that, 2 Peter 3:13. But according to his promise, we are looking for new heavens and a new earth in which righteousness dwells. So that's what we're looking forward to, is a new earth that doesn't have all the corruption, all the pain of this one.
When he says there will be a new earth, right? Destroy the old earth. And he also says there will be a new heaven. Does will he destroy the old heaven, or just take the
Well,
old heaven and make it new?
so it says, that's a good question. So it says new heavens. So one way of seeing heaven is just like the place where God is, right? Which right now you could say is a spiritual realm. What's another way to take the heavens here?
Sky?
Yeah, so it's just right. Everything we see, like the stars, like in some way, he's going to refashion everything. So I don't. I think that's probably what this verse is. I'd have to look at it a little closer, but that's probably what this verse is talking about. But that's a good question. And so we'll go through one last slide real quick. So thus the heavens and the earth were completed and all their hosts, and on the seventh day God completed his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work which he had done. So after the 6 days of him working, he rested, and this set up a pattern for the Israelites, and even for us, that we don't have to like work is good, but there's also a place for rest. So this gets us to the homework question, and then we'll be done, and we'll move on with Cole. So when God created the world, each day of creation, was it instantaneous? Did it was there, Caitlin?
It wasn't. It was instantaneous because it says in the Bible that it happened as soon as he said it.
Okay, so God said it, and then it was so. That's true. So what anybody else have a different opinion?
I also think it's yes.
Okay. Anybody want to take the opposite side?
Like what Nathan said, when he said, let there be light, there was light. So it seems like what she said.
Yeah.
Right there, when there was light, there was light.
Right. So yeah, and that part, so the light was probably instantaneous. Any other thoughts? Yeah, Jonathan.
I can see the other side a little more with animals because there's tons of animals and tons of features go into all these animals, and I can see it taking a little bit longer than he's all powerful. So
Right. Yeah. So he could have, right? He could have done it instantaneous, and maybe he did in some cases. I actually don't think it was instantaneous. So a couple reasons. One is on the seventh day he actually rested, right? So what if you take it as instantaneous? That means God created instantly, then he rested for something like 24 hours, then he did another work, and then he rested, right? Like the seventh day was real rest. Again, not in a way that like God wasn't tired, but he was setting up this pattern. And then also you see some things in Genesis 1 where it talks about him creating man. And then in Genesis 2, you see how he did it over time, actually, over the day, where he created man and then he created the woman out of the rib, right? So you kind of see that it probably was some sort of process over the whole day. We don't exactly know what that is. And that's not something that can be super dogmatic about. But just when you kind of take everything into account, and this is where you're doing a little bit of theology, I think it probably wasn't instantaneous. So we'll jump real quick to, went over a little bit, so we might go over a little bit with the lesson, but we'll jump real quick to Cole, and we're going to look at, he's going to show you a little bit about DNA. So one thing just to keep in mind is like Christians are not anti-science, right? In fact, a lot of Christians were scientists. A lot of the scientific effort that started was because Christians wanted to explore the world. So we're not anti-science. We just think that when you rightly understand science in the Bible, that they actually work together and you can understand them right. And the biblical worldview gives you the best worldview to understand the evidence. So cool. Oh, yeah.
All right. Good morning. So, quick question. Where did man come from according to secularists, according to naturalists? Easy. Monkeys. And from the theory of evolution. Good. So monkeys to man, and then man maybe become each other. Who knows? All right. So evolution. All right. Who's that guy? What do you think? Charles Darwin. I heard that name. Good job. So the story goes that in 1835, Charles Darwin visited the Galapagos Island. It's an island chain, many small islands off the coast of South America. And he observed on each island there were finches, little birds, or maybe not so little, but on each island they had different sized beaks. And he was wondering to himself, well, why is it like this? He saw birds, finches with large beaks, finches with smaller beaks, finches with beaks that are long and narrow, and the like. So he thought to himself, well, why do I see this? What's going on here? And so he did some observation. Like a scientist, right? As a scientist, you want to observe things and come up with, what a potential answer might be. So he observed that islands with seeds and nuts is the primary food source for the finches, right? They happen to have thick beaks. He also went to a different island that had a lot of insects. And on that island, the finches he observed, they have thin pointed beaks. And then another island, there were a lot of nectars, flowers with nectar, and those finches have long beaks. So he thought to himself, why is this the case? What do you guys think?
because God created them in their own habitat.
Okay.
So the thick beak one, he created thick beak because it's easier to get. What was that?
Nuts and seeds?
Nuts.
Yep.
The very long beak for pollen. Insects for the beak in trees and insects. And I think God created them for that purpose.
Yeah, I think your observation is correct. Go ahead, not you.
The finches adapted to their environment over time.
That's right. The finches adapted, right? Islands with seeds and nuts, for example, right? If you had thick beaks to break the nuts, you're more likely to get food, and you're more likely to survive and have offsprings and have kids, right? And it kind of propagates. And so what Darwin actually discovered was natural selection, right? That's the scientific word called natural selection. So let's dive a little bit deeper into exactly what this is about, okay? So in this example, it's just a very basic example. You have 3 types of dogs. One with short hair, medium hair, and long hair. Okay? Let's just, there's this place, and there's all 3 types of dogs, long, medium, and short hair. And they were just playing around, living life as normal. Then an ice age happened. It got really, really cold. What do you think is going to happen to the animals? The dogs with short and medium hair dies, and all you have are long hair dogs, huskies. They can survive, right? They can keep warm. And after a long period of time, you're going to have huskies. You have dogs with long hair that survives, and they kind of able to live, right? Kind of like the finches. So let's ask some questions, right? So first of all, is natural selection observational science? Do we think that it follows the scientific method? What do you guys think? Well, first, let's maybe break it down a bit first, right? Can we observe natural selection taking place? Anybody? Go ahead. No? Well, can't we observe that, in the example with the dogs, right? If you put the dogs there, within 1 or 2 generations, the dogs with short and medium hair will probably die, and the long hair will survive, right? So we can actually observe this taking place. There's other examples as well, like the finches. Can we design an experiment to confirm or disprove our hypothesis? The answer is it's probably yes, right? And in fact, scientists actually use fruit flies because they only live for 10 to 12 days and can lay thousands of eggs. So you can get a bunch of fruit flies, you can put them in maybe a very hot environment and have them, see what survives, and then you keep doing this for generations, right? And because they only live 10 to 12 days, each generation actually lasts, you can go through many generations really quickly. You can kind of see what traits of these fruit flies ends up surviving. So we can actually see this, and can we make predictions that are provable, right? Natural selection. So if we put the dogs, like the dog example, if we actually were cruel enough to try to do this, right, put them in the Arctic and see, all the different types of dogs, and wait, let's say 50 to 100 years and come back, right, 70 years. People can survive 70 years. Can we see what actually ends up happening? Who actually ends up surviving, right? The offsprings are. We can see the huskies. So yes, we can actually make predictions about natural selection. So natural selection is actually observational science, right? We actually see this as something that, from science, through the scientific method. So this was the original book that Darwin wrote called On the Origin of Species. And notice it says that by means of natural selection, okay? So Darwin observed natural selection and formulated a theory of evolution. The question is, does that mean evolution is true, right? We talked about natural selection where we see, dogs kind of having certain traits that survive. But does that mean evolution is true? So let's think about it in terms of a syllogism, right? And actually, I'll give you a hint. Evolution is not true. Now let's talk about why that might be so. So syllogism, right? Remember from last week, right? We have 2 premises and one conclusion. Okay, so premise 1, natural selection is scientific. Okay. Premise 2, theory of evolution is based on natural selection. Therefore, evolution is scientific. What's wrong with that syllogism? Aya? Oh, you were tracking your lips.
Well, according to evolution, the dogs would adapt to the cold instead of just dying off. And therefore, it's like a contradiction.
Okay. Well, from this logic point of view, right, it's a logical fallacy because just because natural selection is scientific and the theory of evolution is based on natural selection doesn't mean it's true, right? Because there's other things involved in it, right? Evolution also has other assumptions behind it that's not just natural selection. So from a logical point of view, premise 1 and 2 are true in a sense, But the conclusion, you can't draw that conclusion just from those two premises. Okay, so to get into this, we'll kind of have to look at evolution just a little bit more closely, a little bit more carefully. Okay, so natural selection, so what Darwin would say is, when he observed natural selection is, well, I see finches changing their beaks. Okay, some, their beaks will get bigger or smaller depending on what they are. If I extrapolate that over a long period of time, like millions of years, maybe they'll grow hands, maybe they'll grow legs, maybe they'll grow some other characteristics and traits, right? So he took it a step far further than what the science actually said, right? And he justified it by saying, well, I only observed it over the period of a few years, but maybe over the period of millions of years, things will be very different, okay? So that was a logical leap that he made that just, isn't supported by science, right? It's the time aspect of it. So this is, according to the evolutionists, right, this is the tree of life. So, can you see this? Here we go, there's a pointer. Okay, so at the beginning is where all organisms came from, living organisms. And one branch of the tree became all the plants, right, all the different types of plants. Everything started with a bacteria, simple bacteria. It became plants. It became all these other creatures. Another branch of the tree became insects, worms. Another branch with the vertebrates became fish, which led to dinosaurs, birds, mammals. And from the mammals, we have apes and humans. So this is the evolutionist point of view, okay? And it required millions and millions of years. In fact, they would say it probably took hundreds of millions, if not a billion years. Many natural selection cycles. Eventually, we'll get to this. Okay, so that's what their claim is. And we'll kind of take a look at that more closely. But before we do, let's talk about this from a worldview point of view. Okay, evolutionists, naturalists, they assume a certain thing. And from what I just said, right, in order for this to happen, what has to happen first are the sea creatures, right? Sea creatures evolve first, and then plants on land happen, and then land animals, then flying animals, and eventually man. What does the Bible say? What is the order of creation from the Bible? What came first out of this list? Yeah? Plants. Plants were created in day 3. And what happened? What were the next creatures after that? Sea creatures and flying animals, they were day 5. And then lastly, we had land animals and humans on day 6, okay? So even the order is very different. The reason I bring this up is that even if, somebody says, maybe God used a long periods of time to do his creation, the order doesn't even match up with the Bible, okay? So they're not the same. And so, remember we talked about presuppositions, assumptions, right? Well, based on these two, as a presupposition, we want to trust the Bible, right? The biblical worldview and not the naturalist. But we should be able to also have an answer for the naturalist, right? From the secularist. How do we answer what they say about, well, we see natural selection, therefore evolution is true. How do we answer that? So that's what we're going to kind of look a little bit more deeply into, okay? So let's go back to this example. Let's think carefully what's actually happening here on a fundamental level. At the end, you have all the dogs with long hair. Did the dog somehow evolve long hair in this example? Or did the long hair existed before, right? The long hair existed before this happened. It's just that there were all these different types, traits that were already available. And because of the Ice Age or some environmental effect, only the long hair survived, so all you see are dogs with long hair. Okay, so it's not that all of a sudden they had this new genetic trait, this information that has, long hair. So the cold climate only emphasized what was already there. And so we have to have a quick crash course in genetics. You guys all should learn this more in your future science classes if you haven't already. But, just to be fair to Darwin, right, when Darwin was around, the field of genetics didn't actually exist. Genetics was discovered in 1960s. Darwin was around 1830s, right? So about over 100 years. So he had to postulate based on what he can see with his eyes. But with more modern science, we can understand what's actually happening on a more fundamental level in the creature's DNA themselves. So traits such as the length of the hair, the information is made up from the genes that a person carries. Each gene has 2 alleles, we call them alleles, and you get one from each parent. Okay, so you inherit from your parent. That's why kids kind of look like their parents. And so in our hypothetical example, right, we'll set up our hypothetical example. So the way that we can talk about genes and alleles is using these letters right here. So 2 capital A's, for example, for instance, in this case, let's say that the capital A is an allele that represents long-haired gene. And when you have 2 of them, 2 capital A's, that means that the offspring will have long hair. Okay? A short a, lowercase a, represents short hair. And when there's 2 of them, one from each parent, the end creature will have short hair. And if you have a capital A and a lowercase a, you'll have medium hair. Okay? Does that make sense? Everybody following? And so you receive a single letter allele from each parent. And the parent can only give a trait that it itself carries, right? So if the parent has long hair, which is 2 capital A's, it can only give its offspring 1 capital A. There's no option. But if the parent has a capital A and a lowercase a, there's a chance that the parent will pass either a capital A or lowercase a, long or short hair, okay? And the like. So, well, look, this is called the Punnett square. So when you study more biology, you'll kind of get into this. But a quick crash course. This is how we determine what the offspring will look like based on their parents. So in this example, there's a mouse, right? So we have 2 medium-haired dogs right here, right, as a parent. Both of them have 1 big A to represent long hair trait, and a lowercase a to represent short hair trait, okay? And so this parent can pass down a big A to its offspring, and this parent can also pass a big A down to its offspring. Then you'll get this square right here, okay? So the child has both a capital A, or 2 capital A's, which means that it's a long-haired dog, okay? One of the parents can pass down a capital A and the other can pass down a lowercase a. Then you get either of these 2 squares, right, depending on which parent passes which. But in either case, you get a short-haired dog. So this is a Punnett square. And then right here, this one, if both parents pass down lowercase a, then you get a short-haired dog, okay? And you can kind of calculate the probability that what the offsprings are, right? So in this case, if the offspring, if the parents are long and short hair, right, you have a 25% chance that the offspring is long hair, because if both, in this case, there's 1 square that gives you, 2 capital A's out of 4, so 1 in 4 is 25%. You can calculate these probabilities, okay? So this is a Punnett square. Following so far? Okay, people are nodding, good, you guys are smart. All right, so let's try another example, right? In this case, you have 1 parent is a long-haired dog, 2 A's, and another parent is medium-haired dog, 1 A and a short A. So I have a question for you. Can their children have short hair, which is 2 lowercase A's? I see a lot of shaking of their heads. Anybody think that they can? Good. Their children cannot have short hair, okay? Because there's 0% probability. Can their grandchildren have short hair in this case? Think about 2 generations later. Yes, good. You guys are very smart. You're following. Because the children can have medium hair, and if they're medium hair, 2 medium-haired children, you can see that they can have short hair, right? So in 2 generations, you could get short-haired dogs from this example. What about this one? Can their children have medium or short hair? No. Can their grandchildren have medium or short hair in this example? Can it? Aya?
They could have medium, but I don't think they could have short.
Can they have medium?
They can have medium.
So in this example, if two long-haired dogs, the children can only be long-haired dogs, right? And can their children be anything but? Right? So you have to have a lowercase a here somewhere for that to get to pass down.
Unless you introduce another dog.
Unless you introduce another dog. I should have specified that. You can't introduce another dog. This is the only thing that's around. So in this example, that's right. You can never have medium or short hair from this starting point unless you introduce some information into it. Okay? So let's think about this case, right? Back to our dog example. What ends up happening is originally we have medium, long, and short hair, right? We have big A and capital A. Once we get to this stage right here, right, you lose the little a, right? And what we call that is genetic diversity. The amount of genetic information that's available in this community is genetic diversity. And before we had a lot because we were able to have long and medium and short hair. But after you're done, right, the genetic diversity is now low because you can only have long hair. You have lost information for short and medium hair. You lost a little a. So thinking in this terms, can natural selection lead to evolution? Okay. Did the amount of genetic information increase, decrease, or stay the same in our dog population? I just said it. Go ahead. It decreased, right? We lost information about short and medium hair. Going from bacteria, which is very simple, to man, does that require more or less genetic information? A lot more, yes. A lot more. I like that word, a lot more. So we need a lot more. I should have wrote a lot more. So natural selection, it shows that we either have the same or to less genetic information, but never more. Okay, so from this point of view, natural selection can never lead to evolution. The genetic information either stays the same or decreases, never increases. So there's a leap right here, right? That's why natural selection, cannot lead to evolution. So the naturalist response is mutation and time, right? It is, and I'll describe it in a second, right? They say that when an allele duplicates, right, that there could be mutation that happens. There are certain things that go wrong. And these mutations can cause new traits to appear. That's what they would argue. And over millions and millions of years and many, many generations, these mutations adds up and become new creatures. Maybe two long-haired dogs, right, when they reproduce, maybe something goes wrong in the process and somehow the short hair appears. So it's true that mutations do happen. I'll grant them that. But we've never observed beneficial traits from mutations. They're almost always neutral or bad. And we also never, ever observed mutations of traits that led to new creatures. We've never seen with observational science, for example, that a dog going from two dogs with long hair will mutate into short hair. Right? It doesn't happen. So there's a huge problem that's there that's never been observed. That's the part that is not scientific. And humans and dog, our genome is very complex. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip this, but the point here is that it is very improbable for mutations to actually cause bacteria to go into man. Okay, the amount of information in us is so huge that if we apply this to any other situation, we would be like, yeah, that's not possible. That's not happening, right? You probably heard the example of, it is more likely for a blind monkey to just randomly type and produce all the works of Shakespeare than it is for mutations to cause bacteria to come to man. So I'm not gonna, just for the interest of time, you can ask me about it later. So what about the biblical worldview, right? Mike has already gone through this. The Bible says kinds, right? Plants, animals, right? God says that they will reproduce after its own kind, right? So the word kind there is very important. And we kind of already talked about it, right? A kind is kind of like a family within this chart, but essentially you can think of a kind as something that can reproduce with each other, right? And each kind has a lot of genetic information in it. So when God created dogs, he didn't need to create, he might have, he probably did, but he didn't need to create huskies and basset hounds, right? The long and the short haired dog. He just had to create the medium haired dog. And through natural selection, right, these other types of dogs can just appear, as we saw earlier from the genetic slide. Another thing we can talk about is Noah's Ark, right? Have you ever wondered how God fit all those animals, two of every animal, into Noah's Ark? Well, the answer is Noah didn't have to bring 2 of every dog types into the ark. He just had to bring 2 of every kind. And so if Noah brought in 2 of the medium hair dogs into the ark, and we saw that from the medium hair, you can get long hair, short hair, and medium hair, right? So he doesn't have to bring those. And so in fact, right, we're just looking at a hair length, but we have other traits as well. So from just 2 dogs with high genetic diversity, and if you read Genesis, God was the one that picked the animals to bring to the ark. So God could have picked very diverse animals to represent their species, their kind. And so from just 2 dogs, you could get all the domestic dogs, wolves, coyotes, jackals, foxes, all these things through the process of natural selection, right, from 2 to all of these. So I just want to end with this. Natural selection is scientific. I would say it is scientific, right? We can observe it happening. We see that through the scientific method. But what does that actually support more, right? That's the evidence, the data that we see in the world, right? But from our worldview, which worldview does it support, right? Evolution, we said that it takes you need to go from less complex to more complex. And we see that natural selection doesn't actually do that. It actually goes the opposite way, right? More complex, less complex. But from the Bible, we see that God created creatures with all kinds of diversity. And from that, right, it can change into all these different types. And we see from Noah's Ark, right, that Noah didn't actually have to bring so many animals. He just has to bring the ones with the most diversity. And through natural selection, it could repopulate the earth. So this is, one way that we can view, or the way that we should view the world, right? We have real science that we can observe, and we have to think about it carefully and actually see how, what makes sense. How do we interpret the data based on our worldview? Okay? And so we're a little bit over time, but just want you to leave with this, right? I just want to, ask you guys, what do you guys want to trust, God's word or man's thought? Right? When evolution first came out over 150, almost 200 years ago, there was no genetics, the field of genetics. But when the field of genetics was discovered 100 years later, we realized, well, that's actually not possible, right? And so God's word was proven right. So don't be afraid of science. I think God is a creator of science, and we can definitely find the answers and how science will glorify God throughout this. Sorry, we're about 5 minutes over time, but do you have any?
Yeah, I think you could ask everybody any questions.
Is there any questions? Any thoughts? Yep. Okay, I'll close this in prayer, and then you're dismissed. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for just for your word that we can trust. Thank you for Genesis, which tells us where we came from. And thank you so much that you created everything, including the science that's around us, so that we don't have to be afraid of it, because it is also part of your creation and it is good. I pray that you would help us all to understand, how you created the world and all these things. But above all, I pray that you help all of us trust in your word. Help us to have faith in you, even if we don't see the answer immediately. We know that you are a God of truth and the creator, and that we should rest on your word and your word alone. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.